author whose books include Alien Agenda, which remains the best-selling book on ufology of all time, and Crossfire, which was the basis for Oliver Stone's film JFK. He's also taught a class even on the assassination of JFK at the University of Arlington, Texas, for over 30 years. And his latest book, Our Occulted History, has received rave reviews. Jim Marrs, you're very welcome to the show. Good morning, my friend.
Hey, Richie, it's always good to be with you, and a great big Texas howdy to all of my readers in the UK.
Jim, it's brilliant to have you on. Happy New Year to you first and foremost. I want to talk to you initially about the book. I haven't had a chance yet to read the book. I've read everything else you've ever written, mate, and I can't wait to read Our Occulted History. Tell us about it, Jim. What's it about, and why did you write it?
Well, you know, I have blended two popular topics that are heretofore thought unconnected. One is the rising interest in the concept of ancient aliens, okay, or ancient astronauts. The idea that there was extraterrestrial contact with humans in the far distant past that's come down to us in bits and pieces and kind of garbled, and you know, because every primitive society in history, you go back far enough, whether you're talking about the Chinese or the Aborigines in Australia, or the Mayans or the Aztecs or Dogon tribe in Africa, and they all go back and say gods came from the sky and taught them civilization, taught them how to farm, taught them how to make beer, for goodness sake. And of course, up till now, up until the age of space flight and cloning and genetic manipulation, everybody thought they were just making stuff up. You know, these are their mythologies. But it's now becoming more and more obvious that I think they were trying to tell us what they knew to be true. Okay, if that's true, then we have another topic that is of gaining popularity, which is the idea that there's a small group of individuals who are at least trying to run the world. It's known as the 1%, the Illuminati, the New World Order. Okay, so my hypothesis was, can you connect these two issues? And yes, you can. For example, I think we all understand that at the top of the financial pyramid, you would probably find the Rothschild banking dynasty, and they've been there for hundreds of years. Well, they themselves claim to be the descendants of Nimrod, the ancient Sumerian god king. So they're well aware of the connection going all the way back, and so I'm making the public aware through my new book, Our Occulted History.
And Jim, the evidence is really strong, isn't it? Because I've seen some of the things you've done in the past. You've talked about this in the past. Some of the, even some of the mainstream, I suppose, documentary channels, the likes of Discovery, they're all getting in on the act, aren't they, Jim, since you started talking about this? And
well,
they
yeah,
are, aren't they?
True.
I mean, I don't know why you don't call a lawyer.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, I mean...
you know, the Iranian news agency has now put out and said that they have been studying, and they say that the United States is run by Nazi space aliens, which sounds pretty far out. But I'm thinking it sounds like they've read my book, Alien Agenda and the Rise of the Fourth Reich.
Yeah. Now, look, talk about some of the artifacts that have been discovered, Jim, some of the evidence itself that led you to draw your conclusions on this.
Well, in my book, Our Occulted History, I go way back, all the way back to the Big Bang, and bring it forward. And as far as artifacts that have been found around the world, there have been, number one, right fairly close to where I live here in Texas, at Biloxi, there are ancient bedrocks that have dinosaur footprints in them, and right alongside are human footprints. And, of course, according to conventional science, the dinosaurs had all died out long before there were any humans. They've also found artifacts, cogs, wheels, screws, an axe that is buried inside rock formations that they date back to at least 1 million years. So there's a whole lot to human history and a whole lot to our origins that we both do not know about nor have been told about.
And Jim, there is evidence that the ancient Egyptians had technology or knew about the technology for flight, because artifacts were discovered that showed miniature flying machines, like tiny models that you would give a child. But when those models were scaled up into a large scale model, it was shown that they were aerodynamic and could in fact fly.
That's exactly right. There are some small gold pieces of jewelry that are still on display in museums down in South America that look nothing less than a modern delta wing jet. And of course, they've tried to say, no, these are just stylized bees. But yet, there was some German researchers who took one and then extrapolated the size right up to a full scale and built a model, and it flew just fine. So yeah, I believe they did have flight. In fact, Richie, if you'll go back all through history, again, to the ancient Chinese, to the ancient Egyptians, to the Romans, to the ancient Aborigines, and they all talk about their gods who flew through the sky. The idea of flight is one of the oldest concepts in the world, and yet humans were not able to fly power heavier than air flight until 1903 when the Wright brothers flew.
Jim, it's been said on some of my shows over the years that, and you and I have gotten into this in the past, that after the Industrial Revolution, we came on very quickly as a species, didn't we, human beings? We developed very quickly, and we developed technology very quickly. And there are a lot of people out there, and some of them might be half-cracked, which is an old Irish saying, but many of them are not cracked. And they say, you know, we must have had some help along the way, because we made enormous leaps and strides in a very, very short period of time in terms of our own history. What do you say to that, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that some years ago I decided, because I like to have a nice cold brew now and then, and a few years ago I decided I'd try to see if I could trace the history of beer making. You know, who in the world came up with beer making? Because I can understand wine, okay? You know, a caveman came across some grapes that had fallen off the vine, laid there in the sun, got a little fermented, but he was really, really thirsty and hungry, so he went ahead and ate them anyway, and then he got a buzz and went, "Hey, this is pretty good." So I can see where they develop wine naturally, but beer? Wait a minute. Beer, you have to have hops and malts, and you have to mix them in the right proportion, and then you have to let them ferment, and you have to put sugar in there. It's a reasonably complicated formula, and it's like, wait a minute, who in the world came up with that? And you go all the way back to the world's earliest civilization, and which would be in Sumer, over in Persia, Mesopotamia, whatever you want to call it, between the Tigris and Euphrates River, where they had, according to the ancient Sumerian tablets, this is where the Anunnaki, which translates those who came from the heavens, landed on the earth. That's where they landed. And they call their place Eden, E-D-I-N, Eden, hello. And the ancient Sumerians, we found out, had at least 4 different kinds of beer. So, and then, you know, how did they learn how to do that? Well, they wrote it down in stone tablets, which are still available for translation, and they said their gods, the Anunnaki, the people that came from the skies, taught them how to make beer.
Incredible, Jim. I want to turn and I recommend, without having read the Occulted History, I recommend people take a look at it, go and buy it. And if you can't afford it, take it out of your local library. Because everything that Jim has written thus far that I've read has been terrific, absolutely brilliantly researched. Jim, I want to turn to another book that you wrote a few years back, which is one of my favourite books on the subject of money, and that's The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, which you wrote about the origins of money, the Federal Reserve, and the like. Jim, we learned from one crisis to another. We had the big crisis in 2008. I talked to people on this program like Chris Martenson. We've had Steve Keen on, other economists. And it doesn't matter, Jim, how many times people come out and say the problem that we have is the money system itself, how money is created, and who gets to create it, who gets to own it. It doesn't seem to make any difference. We carry on in the paradigm that we're in of creating money out of thin air, loaning money, or putting money into society through quantitative easing, which all ends up going to the 1% anyway. Talk to us, Jim, about the creation of money and the Federal Reserve and central banks and why you believe that this is at the root of the problem we have in society today.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. We've got to restructure our money situation. The concept of money as it first began, which is if you have, say, a herd of sheep and you want to go to market, it's a whole lot easier to go and have a piece of paper that says, I owe you my herd of sheep, which you can swap to somebody for goods or services or whatever. And that's a whole lot simpler than trying to herd the whole herd of sheep to the market and herd it all around to people that might want to buy it. So the idea of money representing work and effort and service, that is a sound technique. The problem is that in recent years they have turned us into a debt society. Everybody's in debt. So you can't live free if you have to have money, fiat money. And fiat money is defined as money that this is just what the government says is money. And there was a time in England, for instance, where there were sticks. And in Holland, of course, the great tulip blew up. And people have used shells and things all around the world and precious stones. Everything is passed as money, but today it's becoming not even just pieces of paper. It's becoming blips on the computer screen, and with that, then they can just run up more and more and more debt. And they have begun to turn most people into what they call wage slaves. In other words, you're not really free to pack up and go move somewhere or go change jobs or go and don't do anything because you have to keep your nose to the grindstone so you can keep cranking up more of those blips on the computer screen so you can pay your bills. And debt is what is now running everything. And supposedly, for example, the U.S. dollar, which is still hanging on as the petrodollar of the world, is supposedly backed by gold. And yet, there's more and more stories coming out that there's the gold they say is in Fort Knox is really not there, or there's certainly not as much as there needs to be. So, yes, you're right. We're now in a period of time when money is just numbers in a computer, and to try to cover for this, they just keep printing and publishing more and more and more,
Jim,
which
is there any truth?
Is a way of inflation. That's why things cost more.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Jim. Is there evidence that previous politicians, previous prime ministers in Britain and in Europe, and maybe previous presidents tried to take on this system of dealing with central banks and the Federal Reserve to say, look, this is obviously not in the best interest of the people of the country, therefore we have to look at it a different way. Has that happened before? Has anybody taken them on?
Yes. In the United States, for example, there have been two presidents who have tried to issue interest-free money. And one of them was Abraham Lincoln, who said one of the greatest creative opportunities in government is to print its own money and not borrow money from the international bankers. And then, interestingly enough, the other president who tried this was John F. Kennedy, who in the summer of 1963 issued $4.2 billion, not in money borrowed from the Federal Reserve System, a private banking system, but from just from the Treasury. And the money itself intrinsically is not worth any more or less, but we don't have to pay interest on it, okay? And, Richie, if you think about it, it's those two presidents, Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, who were both shot in the head in public.
And it's a question I've always asked people, because it's got to, I've got to say this, and I'm not kissing anybody's backside here, but you and David Icke in particular have been saying this for years and years and years and years. And when David Icke and yourself were saying this back in the day, you know, you were to some extent ridiculed for talking about the creation of money and all money being debt and money not existing and all that sort of stuff. But I say to people today, Jim, ask yourselves where the European Central Bank and the IMF and the Federal Reserve, ask them where they get the money they give you. I mean, it's the fairest question in the world to ask, isn't it? If we're going to borrow money from you, at least tell us where you got the money. Because I'd like to know, Jim, if you loan me $50 for, you know, to go out on a night on the beer, shoot a few games of pool, I'd like to know that you did actually own the money, that you got the money, and the money was real. But people don't want to ask that question.
Absolutely, and the thing is, it's all a big scam, because if I, you know, under our current system, if I pull out $50 and I loan it to you to go have a night on the town, then that's money that came out of my pocket, and it represents either work I did or something I sold or goods, services, okay, and you have a moral obligation to pay me back, all right? But what if you come to me and want to borrow $50 and I just print up some paper money?
Exactly.
Or scribble out on paper saying, here, $50, and you go out and people accept it. Okay? Has anything come out of my pocket?
No.
No. And so this is the whole
And then, Jim,
scam.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jim.
When you go and get a credit card,
exactly,
and you go out and charge some things in your credit card, most people have the idea that somebody has given them something and they are obligated to repay it. They don't understand that these credit card companies, nothing has come out of their pocket. They haven't done anything except extend you a credit account. And then when you run up, say, $50, they just done you for $50 plus charge you interest for it. And there's nothing behind it. It hadn't cost them anything.
Jim, I got to ask you about, we haven't got much more time to go on this, but I got to ask you about, we've been talking quite a bit in recent weeks on this program about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other trade agreements, and there's a lot of concern being expressed by many people about the European Union-US trade agreements, which would, which one part of that agreement would allow corporations to sue sovereign governments, sovereign countries. Is that something that you're talking about, Jim? Is that being spoken about over there in the US?
Oh yes, but not near as much as it should be, because the problem is, whether you're talking about European trade agreements or you're talking about the Trans-Pacific or any of these things, such as the Prosperity Agreement signed back in the mid-2000s with Bush and Mexico and some of the Central South American countries, they're all styled as trade agreements, you know, and it all sounds great because we're going to work it all out so we can get goods and from other countries and yada, yada. But you could also look at it as restraint of trade, collusion, price fixing.
Yeah. Okay,
this is where the corporations get together and say, okay, we're going to set a price. Well, you know, certainly in the United States, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Britain, you know, you can get in criminal trouble for price fixing.
Well, Jim, it's funny, you know, this one seems to have united even the strangest of bedfellows, because you have Zach Goldsmith here, who's a Conservative politician, and you have politicians from all the various political parties here in Britain coming out in the last couple of days expressing their own grave concerns about it. So even the politicians don't like it, Jim.
Well, that's true, because they, more than the man on the street, understand it a little better, and yet even them, I would say, do not understand the full ramifications of all of this. One thing, for example, that really concerns me is water. You have to have water. You can go maybe a week or more without any food, and you're going to be really hungry, but you'll still be alive.
Yeah.
But if you don't have some water, you're going to be dead within just a few days. And today, they are more and more gaining control over the water supply. And here in the United States, particularly here in Texas, there is a huge controversy beginning to swell about the whole idea of fracking, which is where they drill down deep into the earth and then put water and chemicals down in there to open up fissures and crack the whole levels of sediment and levels of the earth, ostensibly to get more gas and oil. And yet they don't even really need to be doing this, because we have right here in the United States and in Texas, in the Bakken fields up in North Dakota, through Canada, they say there's enough oil and gas in the ground to last us at increased rates of consumption for thousands of years. So why are they doing this? Well, at a certain level up to the very top, they'll say, well, we have to develop new opportunities for gas and oil. But I say that at the very top, they are wrecking the water supply so that everyone is going to have to go to the store and buy bottled water. And right now, bottled water, when you go, say, per gallon, is costing more than gasoline.
It's incredible. And we ran a bit of VT here a couple of days ago of the president of Nestle talking about water not being a basic human right. And there's other video of some of these corporate CEOs saying that, you know, if they could privatize every inch of the planet, they would do it. So, Jim, I was going to ask you, just to finish, I know you're busy there in Texas, I was going to ask you, what's the biggest issue facing people this year in the world? And I was going to tie that in with, what's the big issue this year that the mainstream media won't be telling, you know, the whole story on? And I think you've answered it. Fracking is major, isn't it?
Fracking is right up there, but I'll tell you what I think is the most immediate danger is the Fukushima radiation that's continuing to spew and is now covering a large extent of the Pacific. Dead marine life are found everywhere. Basically, they're killing the ocean. You have to be careful of any fish and marine products that you're getting out of the east now. And plus, they've now found much higher than normal, in fact, getting close to deadly amounts of radiation on the beaches of the west coast of America, and it's going to be carried all around the world, both in the air and in the water. And yet this is not really getting reported on, and yet it is continuing. It's continuing. In fact, the fuel rods in one of those reactors are now very close to melting down, which could then cause even more and more radiation to be leaking out. And what has the United States government done about this? They've raised the level of radiation that they say is safe. You know, it used to be so at one level, and now they've raised it some, saying, well, it's all right if you get this much, you know, and yet the media will not talk about it.
Jim, thanks for coming on with us again. It's always a pleasure. I hope we can catch up again next month, and we'll get you on camera this time. Thanks,
all right,
Jim.
We'll try to get these machines to cooperate with us.
Brilliant stuff. Jim Marrs, have a good day. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Jim Marrs there.